You are listening to the People Centric Podcast, where we talk through the toughest challenges that people face at work and give practical advice to fixing those challenges. Thanks for joining our movement to create workplaces that are happier, healthier, aligned, and empowered by putting people at the center of all that we do.
Hey, People Centric leaders, this is Stephanie Anderson, and we are excited to have you back for another episode of the People Centric Podcast. So before I introduce who on the team is here with me today, I wanted to share a little story to frame our topic and time together. So I was in a meeting recently with one of our clients, so shout out to any of our clients who are listening, and don't worry, this is a nice story. But I was in a meeting recently with one of our clients, and someone asked a really good question that I thought she's probably not the only one who's thought or asked this before, and maybe something that our team could address on the podcast and answer it for all of you. So we were in a context where we were talking about how do we get different people in the team involved in different projects and work that we're doing. And, I even had slides up and I was like, hey, how do you got to be sure you're engaging people in this process. And they raised their hand and they said, how do you do that? Like, how do you engage people? Like, Stephanie, those are nice words on a slide. Engage people. And again, like our answer, which is truthful, but also funny, is like, well, you just engage them. Right? Like that helped answer her question. It did not. And so I thought I would bring
Not helpful.
Not helpful at all. So I thought I would bring this question to our team for a more helpful answer. Because again, I think that's an amazing question to ask when you start doing something new or launching a new project, change in an organization, you're soliciting feedback from the team. How do you actually effectively engage people? How do you get them to not only ride along in the process, but like enjoy riding along in the process and own parts of the process and speak up in meetings and unmute or turn on their cameras? So we're going to pitch this to the team and see what we come up with. So first, you've already heard her voice. We've got Diana Royalty with us. Diana, how do you engage people?
Well, I was just going to say that I'm really looking forward to this conversation because my beatings and lashings have not been working lately. So
I will say, I tell people this all the time. I'm like, I'm a little more authoritarian in my leadership style too. I'm like, I wish I could just like write all the rules down and give it to everyone and they would just do it and be happy. That would be so nice.
That would be so nice. Yeah. But really like the, demeaning and the angry yelling, that's not working either. So I don't know what to do anymore. So I'm just really looking forward to this.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, for probably a dramatically different answer, Philip Herzog on the team is with us. Philip, how do you try to engage people?
Well, I wait until the yelling stops and then I just say, was that helpful? And now let's have a conversation. No, that is not
sassy.
Yeah, right. Well, what I love about your question too is, your statement, the answer of like, well, this is what you do. You engage them. An engaging response would be, oh, let's talk about that. What do you imagine when we say engagement? Oh, person, let's talk about this now. Or as a group, great question. Who else has an idea? What do we mean when we say engage them? Which is what we're doing now. So this is exciting. We had a different step team too we were on recently. A group wanted some input from their team, and someone put the idea forward, what if we use a survey? And a survey can also be a great tool, right? But my ask back to the team was, well, what if each of us here just go talk to 3 or 4 people? And it was specifically a survey about engagement for a specific kind of, camaraderie, rah-rah team thing. So I think for me, woo is one of my top 5 strengths in Gallup. So for me, it's just natural. I'm like, hey, person, I'm a person. Let's talk about this. But my Cliff's Notes version, the best way to engage someone, I think you start with the end in mind. So like, is there somewhere I'd like to go, a direction, and then treat the people you're with almost like a journalist, right? You're either a journalist or a ringleader. And when you start to lean into people and get to know their interests and likes, it's way easier to engage them. You find what's similar between the two of you, and then you walk this great path to doing cool stuff together.
Well,
You just
that's
said a
awesome.
lot of great things that I hate. So I want to unpack all of these things.
Yeah, this is the Woo playbook. So if you wanted to get better at meeting new people and networking, go back and write down what Philip just said, because I will say I have seen him do this in action, and it's quite amazing how effective it is to win people over initially. So that's awesome. So thanks for both of you sharing that. I want to go back to something you said, Philip, a little earlier in your thought was like, why is engagement hard? And you pointed to one thing that I think a lot of times in this technological age, engagement is hard because we're not actually talking to each other. So, yeah, you're right. A survey could be a really effective way. But I feel like so often when we start talking to leaders and teams that are struggling to engage people, they're struggling to draw people in, they're struggling to get people to take ownership of processes or systems, or even bring new ideas and feedback to the table. We'll start asking them questions about like, well, how often do you meet, and what are the communication cadences? And what we find out often is like they're not actually talking to each other. So that's one barrier. But what I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are of like some other reasons that we see that engagement fails, or it's hard to engage people.
So I am bad about, I'm just gonna be honest, what's happening with me. I'm really bad about taking a beat and doing what Philip was talking about and just like caring a little bit about the human being in front of me. I do genuinely care, but I am just like so high on the command that I'm just like, let's get to work. And I don't really care how your weekend was. I do care, but the work comes first. I don't know. It's a thing. So I think that a lot of people come into a meeting and instead of saying, hey guys, how are you all? I'm doing good today. They just jump into, here's all of the things that I know. Here's what's happening. Here's what I'm going to tell you. Here's what I think we should do. And they give this big, long speech about the problem or the process. And then they're like, what do you guys think? And there's silence because the
Right.
person has already said everything there is to say. And you didn't start with a place of conversation. You started with a place of me telling you what to do. And I think that sets everyone off on the wrong tone. And then they're afraid to say anything else, right? You didn't start off by engaging me, and then you just told me a bunch of things. And so now I don't really know what to say. I don't even know if I should say anything.
See, and this is where I start feeling like my answer, like, how do you engage people? You just engage them, is like the obvious thing, right? But no, you brought up such a good example, Diana, that I think it's a mistake that a lot of us make, especially when we're leading a meeting, right? And we've been tasked to lead this project, we've been tasked to lead this meeting, and we know we have to do it with other people. But usually how the meeting goes is we either stand up there or we're leading the meeting on Zoom or whatever, and we say all of our thoughts first and then be like, okay, and then now who has something to add? And then there's total crickets. And I think for several different reasons, either you just said what I was going to say, so now I have nothing to add, so I'm not even going to chime in for consensus, or you said something that is so counter to what I was going to say, now I feel embarrassed to bring up what my idea was because it's obviously off the path because you were so confident sharing yours. And like, so for so many other reasons that, yeah, it is that intentional step at the beginning to just say like, hey, I've got some thoughts and ways we should go, but before I talk, like, I want to hear from the team. Let's just go around and share your idea. And even if your idea gets shared, say that that was your idea too, because that might point us in the right direction if several of us had the same idea.
I Googled the definition of engagement, out of curiosity.
Oh,
So, top of the list, this is the word. This is what engagement means: a formal agreement to get married. That was the top one. I don't think that's what we're talking about.
I think you're on the wrong podcast.
Yeah, I think this is the wrong one. So, after it, though, and this is in your defense, Stephanie, the ironic third most listed is the action of engaging or being engaged, which is like, what is engagement?
Yeah,
Being
that's perfectly clear. I don't
right.
understand what you
That's
didn't
it.
get.
Even
Literally,
Webster
Miriam
is like,
himself, this person is not great at engaging with this.
yeah.
I always kind of think too, if engagement, I think sometimes we struggle too. Engagement doesn't always mean as much as the woo in me wants it to mean this, that everyone is so excited and motivated afterward and that we feel great about ourselves. Like imagine epic moments at the end of every project or team that we work with. And usually there's not this big band behind us celebrating what we've done or ribbons being cut. Like that's in my mind what happens. But really, a lot of the time, I think engagement is just that. It's like, okay, we're unique people with unique perspectives. We get together specifically to get something done. And I think engagement for me, oftentimes there's groups we get together and I'll ask them at the very start to engage them. I'll say, have you ever all been in the room together? And if it's, a team that's looking at changing a process for a hospital about how we bring in patients and then send a bill later, it could be manifold, many different departments involved. And people from different levels, different years of experience, have never been together to solve a problem together. And that is engagement in terms of how we operate at People Centric. And I love it. People say, no, we've never been in the room together. And I say, great, that's what we're here to do. And that's why you've been invited. Let's roll up our sleeves and then talk about the problem. And you said something else. I think, you both highlighted that people want and need that understanding that they're valuable there and there's a reason that they're there. Our goal at People Centric, never have a meeting that isn't needed and never invite someone to a meeting who doesn't need to be there. And so that may or may not happen all the time, but that's our goal as well. And so I think even that, like, there's a reason you're here, you're important, and we have something to get done together.
I do love that. I love that. I also think I'm going to back it up really far. I think that engagement fails when you haven't built the relationship already, right? Like we always say, build or like dig the well before you need it. And that's totally true on teams and with relationships and stuff. So if you are going to end up working with some people, and I know you can't do this all the time, I know you can't like build relationships with every single person in your organization and do this every time, but I do think there is something to the build a reputation of caring, build a reputation of vulnerability, build a reputation of relationship before you need to build the relationships and before you need to lean on those things, because that will help even just going into it. If people know that you care and you want their opinion and you're not going to shut them down, and if there's sort of that expectation ahead of time, it's going to be easier to engage the team going forward.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. And that it does make a difference that people feel like there's like that psychological safety, right? With you or among that team, that they can share how they truly feel or think about something. So yeah, it's important to dig your well before you need it there. I think another piece of this that I see happen sometimes that people struggle with is like they almost trick themselves into thinking engagement isn't happening in a meeting because not every single person is talking. And then we sometimes go a little too far on this and place too much value on every single person in the meeting saying something. So like, as we've been sharing, I've been thinking, okay, like what's the other side to this? And if you're sitting and listening to us and you're like, oh, I just have to I have to woo everyone and I have to build relationships with everybody. And that's a lot of talking and a lot of feelings. I think there's a healthy balance that you have to find with it of like, I don't think everyone has to talk every single meeting. And I don't think that everyone has to have an opinion on everything that we're doing or everything that we're deciding. So like don't trick yourself into thinking that engagement isn't happening because somebody hasn't spoken up in a meeting. I think there is a moment where if you notice that someone has really been silent the entire time to reach out to them. But what I have often found to be true is it's that person is probably more introverted or they're more of a processor. And so they're taking in what everybody's saying. So it's not that they don't have opinions, but they probably want to take some time to think about it. And that's maybe the person who's going to send you an email later. And so then I also have to think about, is this the person that's going to be mortified if we go around the circle and we round robin, or if I call them out specifically, like, Diana, you haven't said anything yet this meeting. What do you think? Like, that's
I think
really
I'm thinking, okay, back off.
and that's really uncomfortable for some people. So I think, like, just a little like best practice there of like, not everyone has to talk for there to be engagement. Not everybody, we don't have to go around and have everything every time. But I do think if you do notice that someone is really disengaged in a meeting, I think go to them one-on-one and be like, hey, like, I just noticed like you haven't said much in these project meetings. Yeah. And I just want to check in to see, like, do you have ideas or things that you want to contribute or share? Or is there a way we're going down the path that you don't like? Because I think sometimes people will do that too. If they don't agree with the direction it's going, they kind of just sit back and cross their arms. And then all of a sudden we've finished it and you hate it.
Yeah. Yeah. And you just sort of started going towards like the tips and tricks to get people engaged. I think all the stuff we talked about, how it fails, it fails if you don't have trust, it fails if you don't have the relationship, it fails if you're not vulnerable and don't really care. But then you kind of were like, okay, also know that not everyone has to talk. So what are some of those like tricks to get people engaged? If you've already done the pre-work, you've built some relationships, you're open-minded to these things, how do you prevent it from going sideways? What are some things that you can do to actually create engagement?
I will say I love a good meeting agenda. And I think it is a way to actually engage people. And I know some of you just rolled your eyes, but I think when it is clear, like, why we are here, like, so what we're here to talk about, what type of conversation are we having? Are we brainstorming? Are we making a decision? Are we giving feedback? And then I understand what my role is in that conversation. Like, am I here to help make the decision? Am I here to just give feedback and share ideas? What's the, like, what are we talking about? What's the purpose of this? That it helps a lot of people engage, because then they understand and they can allow their brain to go to this space that you need them to, versus getting caught up on like some of those basic things. So I think if you have a clear like agenda of like, this is how we're going to run these meetings, this is how we're going to work through that process, spend some time defining that together if it's not already clear, and like talk about what we need from each other.
Yeah, I like that. You also mentioned knowing your role on a team, which I think is super important for the we'll call them the champion, the person putting together the team. I think you need to be really intentional about who you're putting on there and why, and let them know, right? Like, I chose you, Stephanie, because you're the subject matter expert and you're doing the job. So I want to hear from you when we're talking about how the process is working or how the process is not working, right? Or I chose you, Philip, because you are the great brainstormer and we really need some good ideas. So just come in and lay them all out. There is no bad idea. I think it's important to tell people what you expect from them before the meeting gets started.
I also love your response, Steph, because our mission at People Centric is to build healthy teams with alignment and empowerment. And I think a natural fruit of that is engagement, because engagement is not something you can force. I think that's essentially what we're saying. And you can be as strategic as you want to, but in some ways, engagement is a little unpredictable. So what you can control, or at least influence greatly, is how much you build alignment and empowerment on your team. So knowing your role is a part of that, and then also saying, hey, this is your great skill. That's why you're here. That's also empowering. Oh my gosh, now I know, especially when and where I can step up and say something and contribute. Maybe just a couple other things I would add, just tips that help with engagement. Always relational, yes, but sometimes just pausing in the middle to step back and say, hey, look how far we've come, everyone. Look at what we're doing together. Because sometimes you can get in the weeds on something. I was talking today with a banker who is working on a campaign and marketing for a year and a half. That's a long project. So I just said, oh my gosh, what are some of the exciting milestones you've done? And he started sharing, and it was cool. He just got excited because, again, that's why you're doing the work. And that's one way to lean them in as well. And then second, I would just kind of like also tell people around you. A lot of times we work with teams who get excited about something, and you'll say, who else on your team knows? And they're like, no one. Why? You're the only one that asked. You're the only one that cared. And so some of it, I think you can build excitement and motivation behind something that's important to you if you share it and talk about it. But at work, we usually put out fires and talk more about what isn't working well or what we're frustrated about. So those two things, celebrate where you're going, where you're at, and then just include other people, whether they're on that team or not, get them excited enough to share it too.
Yeah, I love that. And especially your point of like, you got to bring people along with you and get them involved in the process. I think that's another point to put here is like, don't move without people if they're not engaged. Like if you're working on that project or you're in that meeting and like nobody's into it and nobody's talking and like you can just tell like they're not engaged and nobody's volunteering to like do any of the work that needs to happen between meetings. Like, don't just keep shoving them forward. Like, that is not the right move. It will be miserable for you. It will be miserable for them. And you will not end up with the best product at the end, right? Of like whatever you are trying to create or whatever change you are trying to enact will not be as good as it could be if people are not engaged and if you're just dragging them along with you. So, like, I think if you're in that moment, and people are not engaged, just don't move on until they are. And that doesn't mean that we just like, we filibuster and it's a holdout and nobody leaves this room until we're all on the same page. Don't do that. But I think you can throw the flag and say, hey, I'm noticing this. I'm noticing like nobody's volunteering to do any of this. I'm noticing nobody, frankly, seems excited about this anymore. I'm noticing like body language in the room when I'm saying these things. So, can we just talk about that? Like, are we still focused on the right thing? Are we still working on the right project? Has something changed in the midst of this that all of a sudden now makes this not the right thing to be working on or be focused on? And just, I think that conversation alone can just re-engage people because either it can be a little bit of a call in to be like, oh no, like everybody's just tired this month. We have too much on our plates, but we are really excited about this. Or it could be the moment where they're like, yeah, you know what? Like, I don't think this is the right way to go anymore, or something really has changed in our business or our industry that makes this like a moot project now. So I think watch for those, and it's okay if you notice people are not engaged to, like I said, gently call it out.
Yeah. And I think you touched on another thing that we consider super basic for engagement, but it's just ask questions. Ask questions you truly want the answers to, right? Don't be like, who do you think you are? And why did you do it that way? Right? Ask the question that you really
How
want.
dare you?
That's
How
the only question you ask me, but I
Who do
guess
you think you are?
yeah, yeah. Oops.
Philip.
Yeah. Philip A. Herzog. Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Right. But I think there are times where you can just say, here's the problem. What should we do? And opening it up just like that, instead of giving your own opinion or all of the background or all of the history, everybody in the room probably knows what's going on. If you can just pose a question that will open it up so that people can give real answers, that's going to create a lot of engagement right off the bat because people are going to want to talk about it. People are going to want to say, here's what I think is going on from my perspective. Oh, that's a good perspective, Philip. Here's what I think is going on from my perspective. So like just asking good questions is a great way to build that engagement.
Yeah, but that's really hard,
It's so
right? And even as like I'm hearing myself say it and I'm hearing you say it, like it's hard to be that person in the room to throw the flag. And it's hard to be the leader sometimes that stands up there and says like, who's got a good idea? Because I think the implication that a lot of people attach to that is who's got a good idea because I don't have one. Right. And so, like, maybe let's talk about that a little bit. I'm curious to hear your guys' opinions of like, how do you break through that and like become comfortable asking the questions, become comfortable just saying, like, I don't want to even think about what my idea is or share it yet until I go there? Or how do you be the person that throws the flag in the room and not lose credibility?
That's a great question, and I love questions. So I think when I started off saying it's like journalism in a way, If you don't like journalism, think of something else. But one of the great things of a great journalist is that they do find very complicated matters and they find simple, short ways they're supposed to make it understandable for people. But they dig deep, right? So I always think of old TV shows where whether it's Monk or Columbo or other people who are running around trying to figure things like Murder She Wrote, there's like details and they find out how to piece the thing together. And I think some of those questions from leaders are good. Both of you have said this, if they genuinely want to know them and don't come with all the answers. I think the number one killer of engagement that I see is a leader who won't stop talking or who asks a question and very clearly signals verbally and non-verbally that they already have a plan and the solution. That is the engagement killer we experience by far the most.
Yeah. Okay, so confession time, because this is just what we do on our podcast. Diana airs out all the dirty laundry. So I am not uh I'm not like the most jazzed about collaboration. It's not my favorite thing to do. I'm more of like a no, I totally got it. I can do it myself type person. And so when we have these meetings where Diana's supposed to lead the step team and like engage the team, I struggled with the fact that I felt like I already knew the answer, right? I know how to do this job. I have been doing it for years. I can figure this out on my own. I can do this on my own. I can execute it on my own, and I can get it done on my own. I don't need all of these things. So it was difficult for me to stand up in front of a room and say, what do you all think? Here's the problem. What should we do? Because I already know the answer. I already know the answer. So it's really hard for me to do that. But the key turning point for me is when I asked the question and I did get a better solution than what I was thinking. And I wasn't expecting it, right? And that happens time and time and time again to me. I'll be like, "Oh, I have the answer." But then someone else will say something and I'm like, "Oh, crap, that's a better answer." And I think that people want to show that they're smart and capable, but I do think that when multiple people get together who are all smart and capable, you're going to come up with a better solution than one person's solution on their own. And that has happened to me time and time and time again. And so I have learned that asking the question ahead of time, even if you think you know the answer, even if you're like so ready to just be like, well, this is what we should do, dummies, don't do it, because you really will come up with a better thing altogether than if you had done it yourself.
That's awesome. That's so cool. Well, I'm so happy for you that you have such an amazing team, that we bring so many ideas that are so great.
Thanks,
Oh
dummies.
my gosh.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. The other thing I was going to add too, I think the other main engagement killer, if you can and step into this to help you succeed, is good. People don't engage up front because they're not used to it, or they're afraid that their idea will be different than someone else's. And either someone does think they're a dummy, or someone will think they're so rude for creating that conflict. So I think that's the other part, to set ground rules up front where engagement, that's the fourth definition when you Google this. Engagement, a fight or battle between armed forces. And I think that's a great definition of engagement, though, because
That's so good.
isn't that great? It's like there's so
Good.
many analogies that come with engagement, which is why the question of how do you make engagement happen is so good, because we talk about marriage, we talk about engaging, we talk about battle. It can do a lot of things. So that's the other part, I would say. Be willing to have different ideas and still come together in the end.
Yeah, I love that. And thanks, Diana, for like sharing your thoughts there, because I think a lot of people honestly feel that way. And even if they might not say it the same way that you did, I think a lot of times we're like, well, like I'm the leader here, and like this is why you put me in this job, is to get crap done. And so just get out of my way and let me do it. And this is where it hits Philip's fourth definition of engagement, of war. Right. And so for those of us who are more assertive, this has become war suddenly. So I appreciate you saying that, because I do think a lot of people feel that way, or it starts tapping into imposter syndrome of like, if I don't show up to this meeting, at least appearing like I've got this figured out and I know which direction I'm taking us. I'm not leading the team into the wilderness blindly. here. But again, to both of your points of like, when you just take the time to engage people and ask the good questions, like you'll come up with something better than you thought. And that then the dissent or the conflict becomes really constructive versus like you beat everyone into submission to doing what you want to do.
Yeah. And we always say that like conflict is healthy and it feels uncomfortable, right? So like if you guys came up with an idea that I was like, I tried that 5 years ago, it totally failed. Here's why. It would feel like I'm being combative. But then because we know that conflict is healthy, you guys come back with, well, Diana, that was 5 years ago and it was a different team and we have different tools and maybe we should just try it and you should stop being a naysayer. And so that kind of conflict kind of gets everybody feeling safe to make changes. And I think those are really important moments in the engagement war. That's what I'm going to call engagement war.
Engagement war. Nice. Yeah. Well, any final thoughts from our team on this topic? I think we've shared hopefully some tips that are helpful for you, but any final thoughts?
Don't worry if it doesn't feel like it's going well, because engagement is hard and it takes time to get it there. And so as long as you keep asking the questions, as long as you're being transparent, as long as you're all working towards the same goal, it'll get there. Even if it takes longer than you think that it should, it will get there. Engagement is totally hard. So just don't be too hard on yourself if it's not there yet.
Yeah, a good truth we all needed to hear.
Always. And just the engagement is the result of something. Engagement doesn't come first. It's alignment and empowerment that comes first. I think those two things lead to engagement. And so, yeah, starting there.
Awesome. Well, we hope that you got something out of this episode and maybe have some practical tips to take back to engage your team better. And if this is something that you struggle with, we'd love to hear from you on your team and like what situations are you facing that feel challenging to engage people. We'll play Stump the Consultant a little bit. So send us the scenarios we did not work through. Send us an email. It'll be in the outro. And we'd love to help you think through that and see if maybe there's some tips we can give to engage your people. Because like Philip was saying, it's the bedrock of being able to work well together and have an organizational culture that feels really aligned and empowered. And so we hope this was helpful. Again, listen to the outro for how to get a hold of us or to send us a topic that you'd like to hear us talk about. But we hope you have a great rest of your day wherever you're listening from. Thanks.
Thank you for listening to the People Centric Podcast. We are so grateful for you joining us every week. If you like this content, please like and subscribe. Also, feel free to share on your social media with everyone that you know. It really does help us. If you would like to contact us, I have put our information in the show notes. Please reach out anytime. We love hearing from you. We will be back next week with a new topic. Until then, be well and lead well.